Hello and welcome back to Shoogly Shed Motors. We're going to get a start on the top end of the engine, finally. I am still waiting for the cylinder to come back from the machine shop from getting rebored. Machine shop I use is very, very good, but is incredibly busy. So it's in the queue basically. I'm hoping it will get done sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, I stripped the forks after the last episode and they've been packaged up and will be collected by Philpots hopefully this coming week. They'll get chromed. It takes a few weeks for that to happen, but I'm not really in a rush because likewise I've got all the powder coating to get done. I've got the frame, obviously, as you saw in the last episode, all stripped down. I've got the wheels stripped completely now, the tyres are off, bearings are out, etc. I've also stripped down a couple of other wee bits and pieces, just trying to get everything, get all my ducks in a row for this, get all the parts powder coated that I can, and then start to bolt everything back together. The engine is obviously being held up by the cylinder, but I can make progress with the cylinder head and the rocker cover. So on that note, what I'm going to do is get the cylinder head that I've painted, get a set of valves, lap in the valves, fit them with the valve springs, get the rocker cover, and get the brand new rockers into it with all the springs all tensioned and set up. Hopefully that will basically mean that when I get the cylinder back, putting the top end of the engine together should be quite quick, fingers crossed. But yeah, it's little bits of progress here and there. This engine obviously was a bit of a mess when we first got it, so it's nice to start to see it come together, and hopefully it will run nicely when it's finished. Right, so cylinder heads. This is the one that came on the engine, or the original one from the engine. It's hard to tell, I'll maybe try a close up, but there's impressions on the, what are the inlet valves? Yeah, the intake valves have made best friends with the piston. I'll show you a close up. If you look really closely, see the sort of half moon indentations in those valves, and then we look at the piston, you can see the impressions that they've made into the piston there and there. So when that cam chain tensioner in the engine failed, the engine's obviously gone out of time as well, so the chain will have jumped, the cam chain will have jumped, and the valves have gone out of time with the piston, and they have clattered into each other. So when that engine failed, it must have made a hell of a racket. Obviously, it hitting the valves has caused it to then collide with the side of the barrel and did the damage to the barrel that I'm currently getting repaired. But it's just interesting seeing that damage. I hadn't actually spotted it at first, but having looked at the valves, it was a bit more apparent what happened. Now, having looked at the head and the piston, it's only the intake, the inlet valves that have done that. The exhaust valves look like they got away with no damage. But the thing to think about, these valves have obviously hit that piston with such force, there's a very good chance that these valves are now bent. And with that in mind, I have this other cylinder head here. This is one that's got cracks in it. So the actual cylinder head itself isn't really usable, but it has 4 valves in it that could be in better condition. It's a little bit, the valves are a bit rusty at the top, but that will clean up. It's just surface rust. The main thing here is that the valves, the kind of trumpet part of the valves themselves, look in good condition. So I'm going to take the valves out of this head, check them all. I can actually pop them in my lathe with a DTI on them and check them for run out, see if they're straight. And if all 4 of these are straight, these are the valves I'll use, and I'll lap them into my good head. If I have any issues with these, I can take these ones out, see if I've got any good ones in that one. And I actually also have another 1 or 2 valves spare in that big job lot of parts I got. So I've got valves coming out of my ears, but as long as I get 4 or 2 inlets and 2 exhausts, 4 good ones, then I'll be laughing. So valve spring compressor tool, This has popped up in quite a few of my videos every time I've rebuilt a head. They're fairly inexpensive, these. So we just use this to push the valve spring down and expose the collets in there. A little magnet. Two collets out. With the collets out, we just loosen the tool off again, and the spring retainer will go past the top of the valve nice and slack like that. You can lift the valve spring assembly out, push the valve out the head. Oh. A bit gentle persuasion. There you go. You really don't want to hit them hard, because like I said, bent valves are no good. So that's an exhaust valve out. Simple as that. I'm also going to get these studs out, because I haven't got these in my cylinder head. I think someone made a mess of getting them out. Studs are a funny thing. People kind of just get themselves in a bit of a twist trying to get them out, but to be honest, if it's not coming out, stop what you're doing and try a new approach. Studs shear really easily, and usually a stud's used with like a steel stud going into like an aluminium block, and the most common thing that's happened is it's corroded and basically seized itself in place. So start by getting your blowtorch out, heat it up, red hot, and then slowly and carefully. Snapped studs are so avoidable if you take your time. Now about those rusty valve springs, as you can see, a little bit of surface rust. It's not pitted, it is literally just a surface rust. So, I invested recently in a product that you may or may not have heard of called Evapo-Rust. As you might imagine, it's supposedly meant to evaporate rust. Now the cool thing about this is that it's reusable. So you don't get rid of it, you just sort of pour it back into the bottle and you can reuse it over and over, which is pretty cool. It's not the cheapest stuff in the world, but it's meant to be really effective. So it's the first time I've ever used it. Let's see how it can get on with these valve springs. So here, to completely submerge the parts, which I've done, and yeah, I think it says it can take up to 24 hours to remove stubborn rust, so I'll probably leave that overnight and come back to them in the morning. Obviously I've cleaned up my valves, they're ready to go, just need to be lapped in. And once the springs are all rust free, hopefully, we can get the cylinder head assembled. Right, these have been soaking for just over 24 hours now. They're immaculate. Not a spot of rust on them. Brilliant. That's a result. Let's have a wee look at one of the valve seats. The valve spring seats, I should say. Yep. Similarly, completely rust free. If you remember, they were covered in surface rust beforehand. So that is an absolute result. I'm well impressed. All these parts look totally rejuvenated. Well, I'll definitely be using this stuff again. Yeah, it takes a bit of time to work, but that is really effective. If you're not in a rush, just let your parts soak in that and the rust is gone. Fantastic. And then the best thing is I can pour this back into that bottle and reuse it. Win-win. Last thing I'm going to do is just give them a wee spray with some WD-40 just to repel any moisture. Cracking. So they're pretty much ready to go back into the cylinder head. Valves just need lapped in next. Right, now it's time to grind the valves into the head. I've done this a few times in various different videos, but I'll go through it maybe in slightly more detail. So obviously I've cleaned the valves up. We've got our intake valves here and our exhaust valves here. I just need to go one at a time and grind this surface into the valve seat in the cylinder head. The way we do that is you use two different types of grinding paste. Use a coarse one first and then a fine one to finish. We put a little bit of paste on and then we spin the valve using this little suction tool. It just sticks onto the valve like that. Very simple. So we'll start off with the coarse one. So you want to put a bit of paste around the outside of the valve on the seating surface. Doesn't need to be a whole lot. Just like that. I also like to lubricate the valve stem just a little bit with a clean finger. You really don't want to get any of this paste on the valve stem because it will grind into the valve guide. So get that in there. There's my valve in. Stick on my little suction tool and get grinding. So it's just back and forward, lift and twist, back and forward, lift and twist. Right, once I'm happy that that is smoothed off in there, I'm just going to pop the valve out and I'm going to clean off all of that paste. See where I'm at with the grinding. Getting there. Then I'll move on to my fine paste. Again, just spreading some of that fine paste over the valve lip. Very careful not to get it on that stem. Pop the valve back into the head. Should be sufficiently lubricated. Stick my tool back on and grind again. I'm just applying light downward pressure, light to firm, and running the tool through my hands until the grinding noise sounds a bit smoother, and then I just lift the valve out the seat, turn it maybe a quarter turn, and do the same again. Up, down, up, twist, down, up, twist, down. What that does is it just uniformly spreads that paste and makes sure that I'm grinding in the valve evenly. So this is the one that I've just ground. As you can see, that shiny lip all the way around, and then you compare that to one that I've not ground yet and see how it's quite pitted and not uniform. Similarly, these two here. So this one is nice and shiny all the way around the band. And then we have a look at the valves. So this one's not been ground, this one has been ground. So looking at that sort of shiny surface and the not so shiny surface. So this has been ground in, this one hasn't. I might do this one again with the fine paste just to get it even slightly shinier, but it's really not bad. Right, all my valves have now been ground in or lapped. Kind of see the sort of shiny edge on that valve. That's what I'm looking for on all four of these. So they're all done, and I've marked them as to where they go back in the head. Last thing I'm going to do is get some degreaser and clean all of this. You don't want to get any of that grit left in there. You want to make sure it's pretty clean. Like I said earlier, if any grit gets into the valve stem guides, the valve guides, it will basically wear them prematurely. So you don't want that to happen. So what we're going to do is get some degreaser, clean the valves, clean it in here, and then we can begin to reassemble the valves and the springs. Alright, first things first, I'm going to push on new valve stem seals. These just push on like this. All these do is they stop oil running down from the head section into the combustion chamber, down the valve stems. So that's 4 new valve stem seals. Now we're ready to start putting the valves in. I've already popped a bit of assembly lube on this valve. So that's my number 1 valve going in there, and it takes a wee pop to go through that seal. That's it. That should hold the valve in place, that seal. Number 2. And she goes. Number 3, and last but not least, number 4. Right, that's all my valves back in the head. We need to now use a valve spring compressor to fit the valve springs. There's a base washer to go on first, down at the bottom, and then the valve spring, and then the top hat onto there, and it's at this point we compress the spring. And then we need to put 2 of these collets in to hold it in place. Bit of a fiddly job to get these in. Once those collets are in, we can slacken off the valve spring compressor . It's good to give the valve a wee hit with a mallet, which seats the collets nicely, and that's 1 valve spring fitted. Right, that's them all in. So that's my valves ground into the seats and fitted back into the head with the valve springs. Next thing to do is to fit the rockers into the rocker cover So there's two shafts that go in here, two rockers, a spring, some pins that hold it all together. So new O-rings going on to the rocker shafts here. We've got our two rockers, one for this side and one for this side. The extra long shaft is for the left hand side, shorter shaft is for the right. We've also got two thrust washers. They're sort of thrust wave washers, I think they're called actually. Right. I don't know if you can see, they're a bit wavy. They add a bit of sideways tension and stop the rocker moving about too much. And then we've also got the spring that returns the rockers back to basically being open once they've been hit by the camshaft. And then we've also got the two hardened dowels that retain the rockers. So wave washer, and the spring sits back here. A bit fiddly to line all this up. There we go. And then this one, similarly a good amount of assembly lube. This one's even trickier because I've got to get the spring under the rocker seat. It's fine. And then we've got the wave washer going in. He says. There we go. Satisfying clunk. So I'm just going to work that around a little bit, make sure that assembly loop is moved about a bit. And then I need to line up the holes for the hardened pins. So a flathead screwdriver, just to push these home, ease those O-rings in. Like that. And then I can use that flathead screwdriver just to turn the shaft slightly to line up where the hardened pins go. So one hardened pin. A bit of assembly lube on that to help it go in. Similarly with this one. That's the pins in. Just check the shafts still move freely, which they do. And that's the rockers done. The last thing I'm going to fit is one more hardened pin. And that goes to hold this little decompression assembly in. At least I think it's a decompression assembly. I could be wrong. So these are the exhaust valves and the rocker on top. And I'm right, it is a decompression assembly. When that is pulled, it will apply pressure to that rocker. I don't really got enough pressure in my hand to do it, but it's just lifting the rocker head. But you can see that will push that rocker down and open the exhaust valves and decompress the cylinder. Alright, so that is the cylinder head all done. Valves with the springs obviously all fitted, so they're good to go. Yeah, not a whole lot else to say about that. The rocker is obviously the same. That's the two rockers fitted. One of them is brand new and the other one is ever so slightly worn. Just ever so slightly. It's by far a lot better than the ones that I took out of this engine. I thought they were a set of brand new ones, but it was just one brand new one and the other one just very lightly worn. So it's kind of the best of a lot, to be honest. So we'll deal with that. I'm sure it'll be fine. Just need to adjust the valve clearances, and that'll all sink in, I'm sure. Yeah, there's not a whole lot else I can do until I get that cylinder head back. Barrel, sorry. But you know, that really isn't a heck of a lot of work once I do get that back. It's just a case of popping the piston onto the conrod, into the barrel on with all the gaskets, head on, bolt it down, and then get the cam chain in with the cam all timed up. Then pretty much that's it for the engine. Side casings as well to go on, but that's just a case of gaskets and bolts. It's not any more parts really to go into the engine I can think of. Yeah, the other day I went to the powder coaters and dropped off the frame, the wheels, a few other bits and pieces as well. So they are now in the queue getting done. Yeah, and hopefully this coming week I'll get the cylinder back so we can get this thing back together. Yeah, like I said at the beginning, it has been held up a little bit by that cylinder getting rebored, but I'm not really in a rush with this build. It's just it's just an inconvenience really. Yeah, I think probably next time I put out a video I'll have that barrel back and we'll get the engine back together. I'm not sure if I'll have the frame back yet, but we'll look at maybe trying to get the engine into the frame if I have by that point. Yeah, rolling chassis in the next month or so is my kind of aim here, and I think that's pretty achievable. So fingers crossed and we'll get there. As usual, please do give me a like, leave me a comment, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. The channel is just growing steadily. It's closing in on like 6,000 subscribers now, so it's building and building, and I really appreciate all the support that people give me. I know that this is like a slight break from the norm, this project, just a sort of light restoration. Well, not light, I suppose it is, involving an engine rebuild and all that, but it's not got all the fabrication that I usually do in my other builds, so bear with me if that's not really your thing. I do have a bigger project, up my sleeve for probably the start of next year. But as with this engine and this build goes, it's just been maybe a little bit more in depth and trying to maybe educate's maybe the wrong word, but just try and show you a little bit about what I'm doing and explain it a bit more. Because with my other builds, I suppose it's just been sort of sped up footage and rushing through things without too much of an explanation. So maybe you'll find this a bit more interesting. I don't know. Anyway, take care. Goodbye. Hello you beautiful people that stayed to the end. I recently put some new stuff on my Redbubble store. There's a few different styles of t-shirts, new designs that you can check out. Also got nice and plain sort of snapback caps, which is what I'm wearing just now, modelling. But yeah, if you want to support me in any way, Redbubble's a really good way to do it. You can get yourself some cool Shoogly Shed merch, and a little bit of money goes towards me and what I'm doing in here. And also I do have my Patreon. If you want to go that step further, check that out. And yeah, if you can, any support would be amazing. Bye bye.